Good Tuesday morning. Mr. Sal Capaccio is back. He was back yesterday, though, at the Combine, covering things. Back on our show for the first time in a while, live from Indianapolis. Fresh off a cruise, Sal was following along.
I was going to say, he's not back here. Like, you didn't stop home, right? You went right to Indy.
The grind never stops. He goes right to the Combine.
Wow.
I did. As fat guys, yeah, because the way that it worked this year, just like last year, Sean McDermott, because he's on the competition committee and he has meetings all week, he wants to do the media availability on Monday night. And it's not really even the official start date for the Combine, but, they accommodate him to do that. So we, as the Buffalo local media, need to be here yesterday for McDermott. So I got up at 4:30 in the morning yesterday in Fort Lauderdale and flew here while my wife and son flew back to Buffalo. So I actually came back to Indy to start the week. But I have not been back home. That'll be later this week. So yeah, that's exactly it. But I'll tell you, great cruise, great time. I just needed the sunshine. I mean, it was amazing to get some sunshine for about 7 days. It really was. It was an awesome time. I don't know if you guys have had a chance to visit the Mayan ruins in Belize or near Cancun, or where was it? I think it was Cozumel. We went to Costa Maya, swam with some dolphins. It was just a great, great time.
Nice.
How much did you eat?
I was going to say, better food on the cruise.
Yeah, too much.
Sal, better food.
That's the right answer.
The cruise or Indianapolis steakhouses? What are you taking?
Ooh. Cruise food's great because it is all free and there's so much of a wide selection. The steakhouses, there are really great steakhouses here. I'm walking downtown yesterday. Met Josh Reed and Scott Swenson from Channel 4 out for dinner yesterday, and I'm counting the steakhouse. There's other great restaurants here too, but they do have some great ones. We know, St. Elmo's, Harry and Izzy's, Hyde Park. There's a bunch of them. But man, cruise food is just it's always there, and there's always something, right? So I think that's what makes it tough.
Even at midnight, it's just pizza, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Ice cream machine never stops.
Yeah, Joe, and especially when you have an 11-year-old kid with you, and it's ice cream machine, and it's time for dinner, bedtime. It does not matter.
Yeah. Well, we're glad to have you back, Sal. Good to have you back. Good to be Combine week. And Sean McDermott spoke yesterday. Lots to get to. Let's start with the competition committee stuff because he's there as a part of it. And, he talked about injury issues of the tush push. There's also just the aesthetic of it. Some people in football just don't like how it looks. I know that Goodell has been against the tush push and wanting to outlaw it. Do you feel like, from listening to McDermott or just chatter around the league, is there a little bit of a growing push to get rid of it?
It's tough to say. So this is really interesting for me because I've spoken to several people as well besides listening to Sean, and Sean's comments echoed kind of the things that I heard from people and coming out of the competition committee, which is this essentially. All right. So I think there's a growing sentiment from NFL people. They don't like the play, how it looks, the fact that it doesn't seem like a real football play. But it's hey, there's no reason to ban it because there's no injury data supporting it. You don't just ban something because people don't like how it looks. There's trick plays people don't like how they look. So what? It's a trick play. That's what you do. So this is really interesting. And yeah, I know this is going to sound bad, right? But guys, it might just have to take somebody getting hurt for it really to get the kind of real backing to get rid of it that eventually has to happen. So I think it probably even falls here and doesn't even get to the owners' meeting in March. Now it might still get to the owners' meeting in March. They might put it on, they might revise it in some way, shape, or form. But that's the key thing. There's no specific data that gives the league or the committee a reason to say get rid of it, other than we don't like how it looks. And that's not a good enough reason from the people that I've talked to.
Yeah. The one thing I wonder about, they have changed. The kickoff did change because of injuries, but also because it became a boring play. The point after touchdown, right, that got moved, the kick, because it was a boring play. To me, Sal, the best argument against the tush push, if in fact they want to outlaw the pushing from behind, is that in 2005, that's when this all came about. It was previously against the rules. So it's not like they would just be creating some rule. It used to be against the rule to push the runner.
I'm with you, and I'll say it this way too, Jeremy. There is still a rule in the NFL that is called aiding the runner that is illegal. Now, in that rule specifically, It's about going to the other side and pulling the runner forward. And we've even seen the Bills do that. We've even seen Deion Dawkins do that. No one calls it. It's actually supposed to be called. Like, that's a rule on the books that says you can't aid the runner. To me, the tush push actually falls under the category of aiding the runner. I know it's not specifically the pulling him, but I think what you're doing is aiding the runner. Now, what's interesting about this, too, is Sean McDermott has the perfect quarterback for it, and the Bills are very, very, very highly successful. We know what happened in the championship game. I get that. But for his comments, for him to say it that way is really interesting because he's obviously looking at it from a general, holistic view, but he also is in charge of a team that can really take advantage of this more than any other team can, other than how the Philadelphia Eagles have. It's really those teams more than anybody. You also see teams like, when's the last time we've seen Patrick Mahomes do any quarterback sneak? I can't remember one. Now, maybe there's one in there. He's run the ball, but if you guys remember, Patrick Mahomes got hurt on a quarterback sneak at the goal line on a Monday night game a few years ago. And that's the kind of thing, like, because that's why they don't do it. So I think maybe that's part of it too. Some of these coaches are thinking, all it takes is my quarterback to get hurt. But as long as it's a rule, we're going to keep doing it. But at the same time, we keep doing it, we're putting these guys at risk. And on top of that, let's remember Josh Allen actually did kind of get hurt on the tush push in the AFC Championship game. I mean, so much so that we were questioning if he was seriously enough to get hurt to have it looked at even more after the season. Because remember when he was shaking out his hand on the sideline right before halftime?
Yeah, that's right. And that was what McDermott said, is that there's always been an injury risk with that play.
Yes.
But he still allows Allen to do it. The ESPN article that I was reading about it, Sal, said that the Bills and Eagles, I think this was over 3 years. Yeah, here it is. Over 3 years, the Bills and Eagles have run the tush push 163 times. That's more than the rest of the NFL combined. All other 29 teams or 30 teams combined have run it less than the Eagles and the Bills have. And I think the Eagles are probably double what the Bills are on that. But still, McDermott, this is part of his job, though, in the competition committee, though, right? Is he almost kind of has to separate his thought on exactly right. What it means for the game versus even if it might hurt his own team.
Sean takes his spot on the competition committee very seriously, as he should. And he has spoken many times about the fact that the people on that committee are stewards of the game. They have to do what's right for not only now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now. The decisions that they make are going to impact the game greatly over the next few decades. And he takes that very seriously. So I think he does a good job of removing himself from head coach of the Bills when he puts himself in that position. But that's where it stands right now, guys. And I'd be surprised if it even gets to the owners' meetings. It could. I don't know. I mean, they'll talk about it more this week, but that's when they lay the groundwork for what's actually going to be presented to the actual official, owners meetings, rules changes. So, but right now, that's it. It's basically comes down to, hey, a lot of us don't like it, but there's no actual reason to ban it. We can't just ban something because we don't like the way it looks.
Right. Is there anything else competition committee-wise that is top of mind? They're talking about the touchback, right? I don't know if McDermott spoke on that, but they're talking about moving the touchback to the 35-yard line.
He said they'll keep talking about it.
Okay.
Kickoffs were up. Injuries were down. Returns were up, I should say. Injuries were down. So I don't know if we'll see a change there, but I think as the season went on, we did see a little bit more of teams just saying we're going to boot it through the end zone, put it at the 30, which is kind of goes against the spirit of why they made the change. So I do wonder, 35 though seems a little bit, I think a lot of coaches are like, I don't want it. That's a little bit too far. So maybe, I don't know, maybe they come up with a 32 or 33, which would be kind of weird, but I think there's got to be some sort of discussion there. The other one is the hip drop tackle. Last year it was more about being fined, and what did I hear? I think Judy Batista told me only one time it was actually called, and it was an incorrect call on the field, actually. But there is still a very high injury rate with that specific play, and they may have to focus more on that this year.
Sal Capaccio from Indianapolis talking Bills and Combine. Sean McDermott yesterday talking lots of different things, including the Tush Push Competition Committee. And then there's his own team, Sal. Where do you want to begin? Yeah. There's interesting things to say about Von Miller, Keon Coleman, James Cook, the coaching staff hires as well. Let's start there. They confirmed their coaching staff hires. What trail of breadcrumbs do we have from the moves that they've made at coaching changes?
Yeah, really interesting. So the Bills didn't, come out and publicly make anything official about the reported coaching staff changes over the last couple of weeks, but now we know. Matthew Smiley is out as special teams coordinator, and in is Chris Tabor. Chris Tabor has a lot of experience in this league, and Sean said that was something high on his list of what he wanted, somebody with experience. And it makes sense. The last two coordinators the Bills had in that position, Matthew Smiley and Heath Farwell, were first-time coordinators, special teams coordinators. And there were just too many mistakes made this past year, as you guys know. And even though Sean said when he was asked a few weeks ago, do you expect Matthew Smiley back, he said yes. And he addressed that. He said, look, at the time, I just want to take my time and evaluate. And that's what he did. And they wound up making a change. So Chris Tabor's the new special teams coordinator. And he brings, a wealth of experience, and he is very, very highly regarded in this league. I'll tell you that. And he worked under Dave Taub, who's now in Kansas City, who's regarded as the best. And I've heard from people around the league who say, like, this guy's right up there with some of the people who you really respect, in that regard. And then the other one is head strength and conditioning coach Eric Ciano. Now, that was reported maybe 2 weeks ago, but the Bills finally, Sean McDermott confirmed that is the case. And I think it's a bit surprising to a lot of people because this is very interesting to me, guys. When you hear a strength and conditioning coach, most fans, and I think understandably, go right to injuries. And the Bills actually were not very injured this year compared to most teams. They did have, I get from fans a lot, oh my God, they had so many injuries. No, they don't. They have a long injury report each week sometimes. That's because the name's on it, but these guys are not missing games generally. Injury reports are long these days because there's lots of gambling and rules because you have to list everybody who's injured and all those kinds of things. But the Bills had, compared to the rest of the league, they had like the fewest number of guys on injured reserve. They did not have many guys, overall man games missed. So when you go to strength and conditioning, why do you move on from the strength and conditioning coach? I believe it's more about the strength than the conditioning. I don't think this move was made. This is me reading the trail of breadcrumbs, as you say, Jeremy. I don't think this move was made necessarily because of some sort of injury rate the Bills have had. I think this move was made because the Bills feel they need to get stronger, and that does include recovery from injuries. Think of what they said about and what they've been saying about Dalton Kincaid, and again said it yesterday. Mm-hmm. Play strength has to get better. He has to get stronger. He has to withstand the rigors and be able to be durable. The way he plays, McDermott said, that's why he's had some injuries, because he's not the biggest guy, yet he plays really hard and he's super competitive. And then they talk about Keon Coleman and coming back from his injury. What did Brandon Beane say? He wasn't the same player. He lost some of that physicality. And then I also think about the fact that I think the Bills feel they need to be stronger at the point of attack. You've had a strength and conditioning coach and staff, essentially the coach, who's been with the Bills for quite a while. To me, it comes down to they probably want a fresh approach and some fresh new ways of doing things. And that doesn't have to be anything against a guy who's done a really good job, Eric Ciano, who's been with the organization. Sometimes it's just a new voice and a new approach. But I think the strength part matters more than the conditioning part here.
Yeah, the point of attack point's interesting too, right, Sal? Because he mentioned, was it Ryan Nielsen, the new coach who's been a coordinator, is going to work primarily with the defensive linemen?
He did. Ryan Nielsen's going to work with the defensive linemen, and he did mention something along those lines as well about him. He also confirmed that Mike Pellegrino will take over the nickel DB coach, which is coincidental. The Bills lost Scott Booker to the Patriots from that position. The Bills grabbed the Patriots nickel coach, so it's like a trade for that specific coaching spot. I think it's interesting that both of these guys, and we've talked about this, come from extensive man-to-man backgrounds, but really everything. And Sean even said, look, that doesn't mean he was asked in a way about switching schemes, and he's like, I think you can't read like that into it, but he said, yes, having the flexibility to run multiple schemes mattered to getting these guys and targeting these guys and wanting them there. Mike Pellegrino's worked with, Bill Belichick, who's done a lot of different things over his career, obviously. So I think, again, just going back to play strength, being stronger as a team, being stronger up front, bringing these specific guys in as coaches, I think all of that leads to why some of these moves were made.
Sal Capaccio on the Western Hotline. All right, Sal, so Keon Coleman, we'll do that next on what McDermott had to say. It was the end-of-season presser from that we heard about Coleman from McDermott and Beane. Beane's going to speak today. I'm sure he'll get asked about the comments from McDermott. Again, I feel like the context is young player. It's a young player. This happens with young players. I think back to James Cook and how they felt about James Cook early on, and now how they feel about James Cook. So no one's writing off Coleman by any stretch. But it jumps out as an interesting kind of thing to track because they are telling us how much they're asking more from him.
You're right about that, Jeremy. And I think about James Cook, too, for this exact reason. Last week when I was on with you and I said, it reminds me of Darcy Regier saying, take ownership of your career. I think they're saying the same thing here. Look, like when you're a young player and you don't understand what it's like to go through a full NFL season, and you throw onto that you have an injury that you've never really had to go through something like that before, that's a lot. That's physically a lot. That's mentally a lot. And they need Keon Coleman, I think, to understand everything about being a pro and going from day one till the last day of the season, whenever that is, and making sure he's staying in that same mindset and physical space and everything. And there are a lot of things that go into that. And that's everybody around him working. That goes back to strength and conditioning. And that goes back to position coaches and coordinators. But it's the player. The player has to take ownership. The player has to understand. And the player has to learn how to do that. And you said it. Like, no one's writing him off. And McDermott, hey, he's a young player. He's going to learn that. That's on him to learn. It's on the organization also to help him along to make sure that he has the tools to get there. And it sounds exactly to me like it sounded about James Cook a couple of years ago. Whereas now it's a 180 about James Cook, which, by the way, he was asked. We can talk about that. And it sounds, and I think that there's obviously a lot of room there, but they're giving him the room, but they're also kind of externally, publicly putting a little pressure on Keon Coleman to say, we expect him to have this really big second year and be better than what he was as the season went on last year.
Would you expect any of that pressure to be competition in the room, the strong competition, or would you say they kind of already did that? Like Cooper was in the room and Hollins played, so maybe it wouldn't be any different?
I mean, I think they'll add Joe to the position, but I think you go into next year, and this is going to be a tricky one because you have to then I guess the question was going to come down to the Bills and Brandon Beane. How much faith do we have that Keon Coleman's going to be able to take that step? Because that will impact how they approach free agency. That will impact how they approach the draft. If they're very confident that he will do that and they can get him there, then I don't think you have to kind of go beyond. You have Keon Coleman, Curtis Samuel, and Khalil Shakir, and you can bring Matt Collins back. I mean, yeah, you'd love to add to that group, and that could push Keon Coleman down a little bit. And I'm not saying they shouldn't do that, and I think it's a good idea to do that anyway. But a lot of that probably depends on how much they really feel confident in that happening.
Yeah, kind of same question before we get to Cook, Sal. He got asked about, Sean McDermott did, about Cole Bishop yesterday. And I don't know that I was expecting this, but I was wondering if he would kind of just sound like Bishop is the starter going into next year. And it didn't fully sound like that.
It's funny. I asked him the question, and I wanted to phrase it in a way, Joe, that I wanted to get maybe you try to make it so maybe you can get an answer that give you that insight, right? So I'm with you. Like, I was really kind of wondering, like, if they feel, hey, Bishop's our guy, and we really like, and he's going to be right there. And look, Sean's not going to hand anything to anybody. We know that. I think they really believe Cole Bishop can be a starter, and I think they really want him to win the starting job. But as McDermott said, again, young player who's got to come back. And the way he phrased it was, like, he said Cole Bishop's wired the kind of way where I think he'll come in and he'll be hungry to win that job, and he's going to take care of this. But there's no guarantees. You don't know how he comes back. This is his first full offseason in the NFL. And yeah, we like the things that we saw. He will have a chance to win that starting safety role. I'll also say that to me, Damar Hamlin is a free agent. I mean, as I sit here today, I'm not going to say that I think Damar Hamlin is re-signed and becomes the 2025 starter. I'd be pretty surprised. But they have decisions to make at that position. The only guys under contract at that position are Taylor Rapp, Cole Bishop, and Cam Lewis. That's it. Like, there's an argument to be made that the Bills need to address safety a pretty aggressive way this offseason.
Sal, on defense, you're on Bishop there. How about Von Miller? McDermott referred to his elite mindset or his elite mind for the game. And everywhere I see Miller as a cut candidate to save money, but he graded well on PFF. Here's McDermott raving about his mental approach and how this year was better than the previous year. I still think restructure / extension / figure it out. Isn't he better than whatever the replacement level player you're going to get, especially if you feel like he brings that added element to the group as a mentor? Yeah,
every time McDermott or Beane get asked about Miller and they're asked will he be back next year? They don't answer that question directly. And for obvious reasons, right? You don't put yourself into that corner because you're figuring that out. And Sean was asked that yesterday. But his response wasn't whether or not he'll be back. His response was, I love Von. He's mentally elite. He said, I love the way he came back this year. He said he had a better year this year than last year. He did not say anything about contractual status, what his role is or isn't in 2025, if he will be on the team. This really does come down to money, I think, in a lot of ways, guys, right? It's got to come down pretty mostly to money. Yesterday, a little plug here, I did write my State of the Bills defensive end article at WGR550.com. And part of that is always looking at exactly how the contractual numbers work for all these guys. And this is a tricky one for the Bills to me because they have a couple options here with Von Miller, and here's how it basically washes out. If the Bills want to move on from Von Miller just straight now, they say, you know what, we're going to just release Von, we're going to move on, going to be 36 years old. They're going to clear $8.3 million in salary cap space, and that's a nice chunk, and they will have that available immediately in free agency. The problem is they'd have to account $15 million for him on the cap for a player that's not playing. You could do that. That's not like, the Bills have done kind of those things before, and teams do that all the time. So it could very well happen. They could also designate him a post-June 1 release. That would save $17 million this year, and then they'd have to count for only $6 million this year and $6 million next year in dead cap. The issue there is you don't get that $17 million until June 1st. Mm-hmm. So what does it matter, right? So or you could, as you say, you could restructure. You go to him, you could lower the cap number, you could do something like that. I think this is a tricky one that all sides have to kind of, the Bills first and foremost have to figure it out and then go to Von if that's what they want to do.
Yeah, I see a restructure could save 10. Like, just, I don't know. It's an interesting thing to track because this is a position, Sal, your State of the Bills series. Defensive end is maybe the one that has the most questions about how different it looks next year. Rousseau, does he get extended or does he play on the fifth-year option? What to do with Von? And then, do they try and land the whale, whoever that whale might be? It could be Khalil Mack. It could be if they trade for Myles Garrett. It appears to be the position that I would say most Bills fans are most dialed in on.
Yeah, it's a good transition. We could talk about what to expect from Brandon Beane today, but let me first say, really interesting looking at the defensive ends yesterday, looking at all the numbers. A guy that I thought was really interesting when I dove into it, guys, is A.J. Epinesa. And we don't think of him like this because he was signed to a 2-year contract a couple of years ago. He's been a nice player. He's a little feast or famine, as I wrote. But, next year, he's actually scheduled to count $7.5 million on their cap. And if I'm wondering, is that too high for them to live with? If they were to release A.J. Epinesa, they'd save $3 million, count $4 million dead cap space. But a June 1st release for him, they'd save $6 million and only count 1.3 in dead cap. Now, that would be more of the, okay, count him a June 1st release. We have $6 million in the coffers for later to do things as they like to have that extra money available later in the season. But however, that being said, they like A.J. Epinesa. He's 26 years old, and it's a position where you're going to create another void. Right? So I'm not here to suggest that they should or they're going to move on from A.J. Epinesa. My point is there are some decisions that may be made, and maybe one of those decisions, a guy like A.J. here, Rousseau, his $13 million, what are you going to do with him? Extension, lower that number. I think they really like Javon Solomon. Javon Solomon's got to figure in here a little bit. He looked good at times, and he flashed at times when he played last year. These are all things that are going to get baked in. So today, Brandon Beane speaks at 2 p.m., and I think he's going to be asked a lot about defensive end. He's not going to address any questions about Myles Garrett. I'm sure he might be asked that, he can't talk about that. Ironically, Andrew Berry, the Browns GM, speaks right before Brandon Beane, 10:30, somewhere in there. Brandon Beane speaks, I think, did I say 2 or 11? I have to go and look. I think it's 2 p.m. today. Andrew Berry speaks at a little before that today. Either way, he'll also be asked about James Cook. I think that is going to be the number one thing asked of Brandon Beane today is about James Cook. Sean McDermott was asked about that. He just talked again, raved about James and said Brandon is on top of that stuff, on that situation. He will be on top of that, and the business side will take care of itself.
All right. We'll be listening. What time today for Beane?
2 p.m., unless they change the schedule, which I'm not aware of. We were told 2 p.m. originally. I think that's what he was on the schedule for yesterday.
Okay,
so.
Very good. Yeah. Thanks, Sal.
You got it, guys.
Sal live from Indianapolis at the Combine. Brandon Bean, 2 o'clock today. If you have a thought on anything you heard there, whether it's defensive end, I'm reading about receiver ideas. McDermott said when it comes to receivers, he knows 0.0% going to the Combine because he likes to go in knowing nothing about receivers.
Yep.
Which is fine. Hey, whatever.